tough hurdle to overcome.
We'll see. All right, John, next topic I want to get into here. Good answer there. We'll see what they end up doing at safety. Next topic here I want to get into before we get Mark Farzetta coming on at 9:20. Looking forward to talking to Farzy, seeing what he thinks of this offseason so far is the offensive line. And you've talked about draft proofing a lot. And do you feel, John, that they've draft proofed enough and added enough right now to the depth on the offensive line? Obviously, I'm not going to beat the dead horse here that we've talked about all summer, that the offensive line wasn't good enough last year. Some of their starting players didn't play well enough. There's a lot of concerns about the health of that offensive line. Outside of Fred Johnson, who are you looking at as their depth right now? And what's the plan for, I don't want to call it stability, but some good contingency plans on that offensive line if you are having, Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens struggling with their health again this year? And even Lane Johnson, who's getting, almost 36 years old now, I believe.
Well, a little bit, and I wouldn't be surprised if today or tomorrow is when they bring in the interior offensive lineman. They don't have a veteran backup because they lost Brett Toth. Now they have bodies. They have Drew Kendall. They have Willie Lampkin. They have Jake Majors. They have a ton of bodies, but they're young players who barely played or are unproven. They got Fred Johnson back, and I think people are happy and say, Fred did a pretty good job. Well, yes, but he's draft proofing. That does not prevent them from drafting a tackle. And if they draft a tackle, Fred's going to be SOL. It's just the nature of this business, unfortunately. So they have plenty, even a tackle. They have Miles Hinton, Cameron Williams, Holland Pierce. They have plenty of backups, plenty of young potential developmental players, and that's another thing. It's not Jeff Stoutland anymore. It's Chris Kuper. So who knows if any of these guys are going to develop. But they have a boatload of bodies. And I do know the organization, at least last year, really liked Drew Kendall, really liked Cam Williams after week 18. And think if he would have went back to Texas, probably would have been at worst a day 2 pick, maybe even a first round pick. So they like those two players. Everybody else, I think Willie Lampkin's going to get a lot of hype just because of his size and his athleticism. But it's unproven, whereas Fred Johnson on the outside is proven, at least as a backup. So it wouldn't surprise me if they brought in a veteran interior player, because that's the one thing they don't have right now.
Yeah, I think they need it. It's going to be interesting to see what they end up doing on the offensive line. John, what's your personal thought right now on Chris Kuper? Obviously, we don't know, but there's a lot of people who talk about it. I'm curious to hear what you think of the loss. I mean, I think you always give good context on the meaning and the impact of coaches versus players, and obviously how you see that, I think, is not the most conventional way, which doesn't mean it's wrong. I think it's probably a good thing, considering, the way that people think about things in life. But how do you see Chris Kuper? Do you see it as a big problem, or are you in wait and see mode, or not that consequential? Where's kind of the John McMullen thought process on Chris Kuper?
Well, it's a tough spot for him because, Stoutland's a legend in this town. And it's always difficult to replace a legend because people are going to compare you to him. And he comes in at a time where players are declining. So, Jeff Stoutland's resume is dotted with Pro Bowls and all pros. He had Jason Kelsey in his prime. He had Lane Johnson in his prime. He had Jason Peters in his prime. These are Hall of Fame level players. To expect Chris Kuper to turn Cameron Williams into Lane Johnson is probably unrealistic. to expect him to turn Blake Miller into Lane Johnson is probably unrealistic. Or insert first round draft pick,
Right.
wherever you like. It's probably unrealistic.
Yeah, and I think the truth there is did Jeff Stoutland turn Lane Johnson into Lane Johnson? I don't know. I mean, Lane Johnson might have become Lane Johnson anywhere.
I give more credit to the player. Now, again, it's similar to Vic. I think, Stout probably got him a little bit better than where he would have gotten under somebody else. Where he would have gotten under somebody else is maybe one less All-Pro or two less Hall of Fame votes. I mean, the guy's so gifted. Yeah, I think he was going to be Lane Johnson. And, Jason Kelsey, Jason Peters, as I said, even if you want to go down to Brandon Brooks and Guy Stout himself, you heard some of the names if you listen to him on Nick Foles. He always brings up Brooks. He always brings up Isaac Seumalo. Loves Isaac. You heard some of the names if you listen to him on Nick Foles' podcast, but he had a lot of fucking talent. I think, and then there were, I think the best Jeff Stoutland developmental stories, I think of it differently than everybody else. I think it's Brett Johnson. I think it's Brett Toth. That's who I think it is. These are guys who, and Brett told a story, he was doing nothing. He was angry to be here. He was like, why are you acting like I'm a starter? He just wanted to pick up his paycheck and hold bags on the scout team. And he's out there playing at a competitive level. Brett Toth, everybody's like, Brett Toth stinks. Why is he keeping
Becton too, Toth? Right? Becton's another good one.
Yeah, Becton's a good one. But he had talent. I mean,
right.
Becton was
first round pick.
Yeah. The Brett Toth was like, people are like, why is he can't snap, he can't do this, he can't do that. He was fucking good last year. It took a long time, but he developed him. Those are the ones that I'm a little bit different. If you have Hall of Fame talent, you have Hall of Fame talent. Now you still got to get there. And then you have Lesser Isaac's a big success story. There's a lot of players, but when you look at Kuper in Minnesota, there's two players specifically: Garrett Bradbury, who was a first round pick, and Ed Ingram, who was a second round pick, and they were terrible. Which is, it happens. Andre Dillard happened here. He was a first round pick. But the problem is they went to other places and played well. That's a concern for me. And there's other, like Kristen Darrisaw was so good. That's a good, he's just good. He developed under Chris Kuper before he got hurt. Brian O'Neill is just good. And he's been there for years before Chris Kuper. So I don't know if you give him credit for that. And Donovan Jackson was a first round pick last year, and he's pretty damn good because he's gifted. So it's a little bit of give and take. So it's wait and see, certainly. But my concern is people are not going to give him a lot of rope because of what they think of Stoutland. And the second part is he's not getting the Stoutland Landon Dickerson. Hopefully he's getting the Stoutland Cam Jurgens, and hopefully Cam can get healthy. I have more confidence in Cam than Landon getting healthy. But, I'm not a doctor. It's just the way I perceive it. And obviously he's getting Lane Johnson at the end of his career. It's a tough, and these guys have all been coached one way, and now he's got to coach them a different way. Got to teach old dogs new tricks.
Yeah.
Tough spot for him. I'll say that.
And what would success look like for Chris? It almost feels like it's, I don't want to say it's impossible, but Yeah, I mean, there's a reason people say never follow the legend or whatever the phrase is. What
Yeah.
does success look like for Chris Kuper this year, you think?
Well, top 5 offensive line.
Oof,
And
it's gonna be tough for him.
I don't know if it is because, I mean, if those guys are healthy, they're going to have a top 5 offensive line.
Yeah, but that's a big if. I mean, you
I know.
understand that Lane
Well,
Johnson's
yeah.
36, Cam Jurgens coming off back surgery. Landon Dickerson, obviously we've beaten that dead horse. We know how badly injured Landon Dickerson is. Jordan Mailata is almost 30 years old now. He's getting older, So that's a tough ask, but doesn't mean it can't be done.
No, and I think it has to do strictly with health. I think if they're healthy, Chris Kuper, Jeff Stoutland, insert name Greg Austin, the assistant offensive line coach. If they're healthy, they're going to be a top 5 offensive line because they're good. And I think the coaches will adjust ultimately. And, I thought what Howie said was interesting. Well, we're going to look for more athleticism and a click more athleticism, whatever he said. But I'm never going to look at guys who can displace defenders as a bad trait. Guys can blow people off the ball. They're not going to turn their heads and say, "Hey, Landon, go reach block." If he's healthy, they're going to let him blow people off the ball. I think ultimately might take them a while, but I think they'll get there.
What do you think the chances are the Eagles use their first round pick on an offensive lineman?
Very good chance. If you're playing the odds, that's who they're going to pick. There's a bunch of them, bunch of good ones. Should be one or two they like at 23 that even if they don't have to move up. Yeah, I mean, if you're playing the odds, offensive line should be the heavy favorite.
And you think it's the right move to draft the Lane Johnson replacement now? Some people have said that's a luxury pick. If you're not gonna have a draft a guy in the first round, that would be penciled in as a starter on day one. And I don't know that he would. Now you've talked about moving him to right guard to start, but I don't even think that's a guarantee. Because I thought Steen was okay last year. So do you think that's the right move, or do you view that as somewhat of a luxury pick, but maybe a necessary luxury pick?
Yeah, I don't think it's a luxury if you've been trying to do it for years and haven't. You see it with Dallas Goedert. I mean, everybody sees the necessity, but the last thing you want to do is, be in a position where Lane walks away and you're at next year's draft and you have to go get his replacement. And then you're in that desperation scenario. And it, maybe if it happened with Dallas Goedert this year, maybe more people would change their way of thinking about the term luxury, because I think, and I say it all the time, and I've said it a lot this week, everybody's caught up in the immediacy of it. It's a luxury right now. Again, how he looks at this stuff in 3-year windows.
Well, remember, I mean, it wasn't a big deal. Well, it was a big deal, but the Eagles weren't in a bad position when Fletcher Cox retired because they addressed it. Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis.
Well,
but that's how I view Lane Johnson. To your point about it being, it feels like a luxury right now, but it won't feel like a luxury when Lane Johnson hangs up the cleats and you got a guy.
Yeah, for years they said, why are you drafting Cam Jurgens? And that was a 2nd-round pick.
Right.
He didn't play at all as a rookie. And then the second year he was playing guard. He didn't get to center until his 3rd season.
Right.
And he played well before he got hurt. And nobody was saying it was a luxury then. So it is. And again, 3rd season, 3 years. It's not just about the moment. Look, if the moment works out, it's great. You draft Quinyon Mitchell, and life is funny. They didn't want to draft Quinion Mitchell, but they did, and it worked out. So
Sometimes it's better to be lucky and